This episode of AU Manufacturing Conversations is sponsored by MYOB Acumatica, enterprise resource planning software designed to help Australian manufacturers streamline operations, boost productivity, and manage everything from finance to supply chain in one flexible solution. Valantis Vais, thank you very much for joining us on AU Manufacturing Conversations to talk about a topic that is probably very much front of mind for most businesses at the moment, AI and how it's shaping manufacturing.
Lovely. It's great to be here.
Let's get started, as we usually do, with a brief introduction. Tell me about yourself and your role at MYOB.
Yeah, so my name's Valantis Vais, and I'm responsible for our ERP that kind of supports mid-size and enterprise businesses across Australia and New Zealand to help achieve their ambitions. So I've been now at MYOB for a little over 4 years, and kind of over that time, I've seen the volume of customers on our cloud ERP platform, MYOB Acumatica, almost double, and kind of put us now in a position where we're the number one cloud ERP. So I'm super excited.
Well, that's a good bit of context for listeners. So let's get to the meat of the conversation with out of the way. Listeners and, well, manufacturing leaders everywhere, I'd say they probably interpret AI in different ways, and that's no surprise because it is famously a suitcase word, as a man smarter than myself once described it. Tell me how you define AI in a business and manufacturing context.
Yeah, suitcase word is a great way to describe it. Like for me, kind of AI spans a spectrum of capabilities and actually a spectrum of technologies. So I kind of think of it across those kind of two dimensions. And AI spans kind of simple assistance, doing repetitive tasks, but then all the way to kind of predictive and prescriptive analytics that are able to do things like yield loss risk, understand inefficiencies in production schedules. So kind of AI can do a lot and can mean a lot. So the way that I think about it, and particularly I think for manufacturers, almost starting with kind of AI in the physical world. So let's say the manufacturing floor, kind of relative to AI in more a virtual world. So let's say the office. Now, both of those kind of scenarios, especially recently, have started to share some kind of fundamental technologies that have seen huge improvements recently. So for me, that's where I'd suggest we start as we think about what is AI. So if you think about those underlying fundamental technologies, we're kind of going through a huge transformation with respect to what these technologies entail. So it's kind of helps, let's start with kind of the before, kind of traditional AI, the now, which is more generative AI, and then kind of what's coming next, which is more agentic AI. So as we think about traditional AI, and for some of you who have been following this space for a while, it was previously called machine learning, but kind of now it's sitting under this broader umbrella of AI. And these are the types of capabilities that have been around for a while. So these are the types of systems like vision systems. So if you've had a picker on a manufacturing line that had to identify objects, that was machine learning. Essentially, it was educated based on a whole lot of images to understand how the system works. Versus in the kind of the office, it's the same technology that's been used to kind of read documents. So document recognition, OCR, as it may have been heard, and that's kind of traditional AI. The thing that has kind of captured everyone's imagination is what's currently known as generative AI, but is often sometimes referred to as a large language model, or shortened to LLM. Now, these new technologies have opened up essentially a fundamentally new technique that took the world by storm with ChatGPT, which was launched now in November 2022. That feels like a long time ago. These kind of large language models have opened up very, very different use cases because essentially these models are able to ingest huge amounts of data. So in this instance, the entire internet, and are then able to create certain behaviors like the chat experience that many of you may have already had talking to ChatGPT. If we look at what's coming next, often what you'll start to hear more and more about is these agentic AI experiences. And although agentic AI leverages these same kind of LLM, large language model techniques, what they're able to do is actually do more end-to-end automation. So they're able to actually complete a task from start to finish. So to give you some examples of this, similarly, let's think about the manufacturing floor versus the office. So in a manufacturing situation, what an agentic AI will be able to do is essentially, these are scenarios where you'll be able to train the robot a lot easier to what you have been in the past. So think of it being able to just see a human do a task, and it would then be able to replicate that activity. And that trajectory kind of leads you towards actually what are known as like humanoid robots, which interestingly, the first one was released yesterday kind of for the home, which was pretty interesting. And in my mind, that's kind of where AI is moving with respect to the physical world. So, humanoids being able to interact, but it's kind of coming later. If we then think about agentic experiences in the office, think of these as being things like a procurement agent, and it tracks component usage, predicts shortages, can propose or even auto-create purchase orders with pre-approved guardrails, and then it may actually then route back to the human to approve it. So that's kind of an agentic experience that you can imagine operating in an office. So for me, as I think about that suitcase term of AI, you kind of have traditional AI in there, generative AI, and then kind of finally you have this agentic AI element, which also helps you kind of understand all the various things that are kind of playing out.
Economists and people who run companies are always concerned with productivity, i.e., doing more with less. Where is AI already making the clearest difference within manufacturing and with that issue?
And we've done some kind of research around this recently that I'll share in a moment. But I think what's really helpful to understand kind of the broader impact of this technology is also to kind of stop and step back and understand where different businesses are on this trajectory. And we recently released this kind of point of view around this vision towards achieving what we've coined as kind of the autonomous business. And it's a little bit aspirational and it's very forward leaning. But it kind of helps to understand what the end state looks like to then contextualize where are we today and where we're seeing productivity improvements, but also connecting back to where it could go. Because that's where I think people and economists at the moment are getting extremely excited is about, well, where could it go over time? So to just kind of describe to you what this autonomous business idea is, it's almost using analogies from the car industry. So in the car industry, for a long time now, they've been working towards this aspirational vision of the fully self-driving car, FSD. And for me, there's a lot of analogies to the autonomous business. So with a fully self-driving car, you kind of have these different levels, like level 0, kind of no autonomy, driving it all the time. Level 1, driver assistance, so think like cruise control. Level 2, lane detect. Level 3, lane adjust. Level 4, point to point. Level 5, I just jump in the car, I tell it where I want to go, and it takes me from A to B, end to end. That same approach kind of applies to the way that businesses can operate as well. So no autonomy or even no digitization, paper-based systems. Kind of level 1, you end up in a scenario where you've digitized your activities. Level 2, a degree of automation. Level 3, the injection of these agentic AI experiences that I talked about earlier. Level 4, multiple agents interacting with each other, all the way to level 5, where you actually have a business that runs itself with respect to the back office, but then essentially allows the people to do the activity that adds value. So in terms of the production activities or the activities interacting with customers. A really long answer for a very short question with respect to how we see it playing out over time. But if you think about those levels and then you translate it down to where are they seeing benefits today, it's kind of less surprising, right? Where 38% of people are seeing improvements today in the adoption of AI is in increased productivity, automations of low-value activities as they're moving up those levels of automation. The other thing that they're also seeing as they're adopting AI is actually just more consistent and accurate documentation. Think about those tasks that people are reluctantly doing, might be rushing, might not be completing. AI is relatively tireless and hence can just do that task at a higher degree of accuracy. And then finally, also just improved administration and data management. So 32% of people saw that improvement along with improved decision-making. So there's productivity enhancements, better accuracy, and then also just better decision-making.
A term that's often used to describe manufacturing is data rich but insight poor. How can AI change that and help companies harness things like operational and financial data?
So manufacturers capture huge volumes of data, as you mentioned, across machines, lines, batches, suppliers, customers. But often a lot of this data sits in silos. But even if you take it out of the silo and you bring it all together, it's an incredible amount of data and it's incredibly challenging to know where to start. What AI helps do is it helps interpret that information. So it helps you understand where there are trends. It helps you even navigate what are the right questions based upon the symptoms that you're experiencing. So to give you an example, let's say you're trying to make a really complex decision, such as scheduling. What AI will enable you to do is actually understand I can tell it I'm having these challenges around scheduling, and then it can then guide you towards what pieces of information are most relevant to kind of help make the right decision with respect to scheduling. Or let's say you're having problems with profitability and you share with the large language model that I'm having challenges around profitability. It can then guide you through a set of questions that you would kind of interrogate in your data to kind of identify cost anomalies or other issues like that. In practice, these predictive analytics can kind of generate faster, more precise cost estimates, but it can also flag recurring or unusual patterns in your information, whether that's on the manufacturing line or even in your office.
Earlier, you mentioned some interesting statistics around productivity, which I believe came from a recent MYOB survey of mid-sized manufacturing business leaders.
Yeah, so what we've seen in terms of adoption of these technologies is that it kind of depends on production complexity, supply chain dependencies, budget skills. But what we've seen so far is that looking ahead, leaders are pointed more towards, and what we essentially asked the question is, where are you looking to focus over the next kind of 12 months? And what we saw was that 45% of businesses are looking in their payroll and workforce management areas, so kind of automating payroll processing, scheduling, and timesheet approvals. They're also about 43% are looking at kind of inventory and supply chain optimization, so optimizing stock levels, reordering. And then 43% are also looking at reducing the amount of administrative tasks and data entry, so automating repetitive back-end processes, which is interesting. Kind of it reinforces that point we discussed earlier around these productivity enhancements is where they're looking to make some improvements, but then also kind of supported by decision making.
I mentioned mid-sized firms a little earlier. For such firms of the middle market, I guess you'd call them, they see the potential of AI but feel overwhelmed. What would you give them in the way of advice for first steps to prepare their business and workforce?
Thinking about those levels we discussed earlier, the first focus needs to be on strengthening your data quality and accessibility. As amazing as AI is and large language models are, they're still kind of limited by the constraint of what some of you may know as GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. The starting point is always making sure that you have this foundation of data that is digitized and is kind of in the cloud, such that you then have the ability to achieve some of these more impressive use cases thereafter. Now, the second thing once you have that is making sure that you're thinking about your AI use cases, not for the sake of AI and technology. Do not go technology first, go kind of business first. What's the measurable pain point or challenge that you are trying to overcome? And have that as your focus area. So is it manual data entry or reconciliation? Is it the slow identification of anomalies? Is it the fact that your sales team is missing cross-sell opportunities? Start with the business value that you want to go after first. Once you then have that, the next thing to do is then start small. So start small with respect to a pilot project, something that enables you to experience the technology, deliver the value, and start to build momentum. I've seen many projects where they go too big too early, and essentially they get stuck in the complexity of the execution as opposed to starting small and getting traction. The other thing to consider as well is this adoption of AI also has an emotive aspect to it. And what we saw within our organization at MYOB was that when people start to interact with AI and large language models, they kind of start to feel like it's cheating. They kind of start to feel like it's not them doing the work, it's somebody else doing the work. And we kind of went through an exercise as a leadership group around having us have personal buy-in in its use, but then equally leading by example. Leading by example in regards to setting the expectation that you should be comfortable using these models to help guide your work. And to the extent that at some point we actually started to say, we want you to cheat with AI so that it kind of helps mobilize and helps people experiment with respect to kind of its use as opposed to feeling like it's a dirty word or something not to use.
Would you like to perhaps go a little further along with some examples of how manufacturers are applying AI, production management, supply chain, elsewhere, and the results that they're seeing?
Yeah, so AI really joins the dots between the back office and the shop floor. So to give you a really specific example, think about the shop floor summaries that often someone in the back office would want to see relative to what's kind of happening on the shop floor. Now, instead of waiting for these kind of daily or weekly reports. What AI can do is actually summarize this line level performance in a way that's more consumable by the people who read these reports. What are the causes of machine downtime, scrap events, safety events? And then what it's able to do is send these concise updates to kind of operational leaders so they can action and reflect on what's actually happening. So just better shop floor summaries. The other thing is in regards to change and scope control. I suspect many of your listeners don't enjoy receiving engineering change requests or customer spec updates that are arriving a little bit late. And sometimes they get lost in people's inboxes and they don't kind of get communicated to the floor quick enough. What you can now do is essentially with AI, we've seen examples where people are putting AI at the end of these email trails to be able to identify when there are material changes, create summaries, and essentially bring it to people's attention way earlier, reducing that email overload, but also preventing missed steps in regards to changes to specs and things on the production floor.
A little while ago, you mentioned the old GIGO contraction. Let's hear some more now, I guess, about some other big barriers to AI adoption in manufacturing and how people can go about overcoming them.
Alongside this kind of recent research, we also asked that exact question in terms of what are mid-market manufacturers' kind of top challenges in actually adopting cloud, but cloud is also a pathway to AI, as I talked earlier. And what we saw there was the highest challenge, which is at 37%, was actually a lack of in-house expertise, skills, or resources to kind of pursue these opportunities. The second highest at 36% was actually just high and unpredictable migration costs, people just being unsure of what's it really going to cost for me to get there. And then the third one at 30% was actually ongoing operational costs being higher than expected, essentially the run costs of maintaining these technologies being of a concern. And then at 25%, so a quarter of mid-sized businesses, their main concern is actually data security, privacy, and compliance. Those were the challenges that mid-sized manufacturers were seeing in regards to their adoption of cloud and, in essence, kind of AI. To close the skills gap, my recommendation would be essentially starting with pilots. Starting with pilots to give people an opportunity to experience the technology. One of the things with this technology is it's very hard to describe in regards to how to interact with it. Like there isn't a user manual. And if I wrote you a user manual today, in 3 months' time, I'd have to throw it out and write it again. So starting with small pilots, giving people exposure to the technology and creating a safe space for them to interact with it is the best way at this stage to kind of start to develop that in-house expertise and skill in regards to how to interact with this technology. The second aspect around these unpredictable migration costs and kind of these ongoing costs to support the technology is actually just making sure you work with partners who understand your business. And they understand your business with respect to how it operates today. They understand the current technology you're using, like what's the platform that you're currently on from an ERP standpoint or whatever technology you're using, but then equally understands where you want to go to next. Because if you're working with a partner or a vendor who kind of knows you're from and you're to, it's just a lot easier for them to help talk both languages and help the people who kind of intimately understand the current solution kind of make that shift to a cloud alternative as an example. And that's where you get that predictability in those costs, both in terms of kind of making the move, but then also kind of the costs associated with kind of running it on an ongoing basis. And then finally around data security. So data security is incredibly important. And having been kind of a cloud vendor with MYOB Acumatica for a long time now, we know that our right to operate is based upon us being able to maintain that data security and privacy. So the big important thing is making sure that you're aware of where your data is stored, making sure your data is stored here and essentially locally controlled, and then making sure you're aware of the partners that you work with. So we work very closely with AWS and ThoughtWorks, global institutions with deep knowledge in this space, but then equally kind of working with us who understand our local requirements really helps in regards to making sure we have that right balance in terms of global technology coupled with local controls.
It's not the end of the year, but it's pretty close to it. And it's probably the point of the year where people start making their predictions about what comes next. In line with that, I think it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on what's happening or what you believe will happen over the next 12 months regarding opportunities for AI to transform mid-sized manufacturing businesses.
I think where we are at the moment is those large language models, those generative AI experience, in my mind, are now coming to a level of maturity where we will start to see them operate in the business on a day-to-day basis. So they're going to move away from being just used with consumers trying to work out what their right gym routine should be, towards actually coming into the workforce in a systematic way, particularly in mid-sized businesses. So what that looks like is in 12 months' time, there will be very few decisions that a business will make where they won't have had a large language model or an AI assistant participate in the decision making. Whether that's to extract information from an ERP system to make sure it's easier but more data informed, or whether that's actually some automation that has occurred using a large language model to help get that information to the right place. So in 12 months' time, I think that that's going to be extremely prevalent across mid-sized businesses. The more forward-leaning organizations in the next 12 months, for me, will actually start to experiment with some of these kind of agentic experiences. And I think these agentic experiences will start to play out both on the shop floor with respect to IoT-driven predictive maintenance opportunities for better machine vision, kind of quality checks. I think you're going to see more and more of those as they now become just a lot more accessible and a lot easier for people to do. A little bit closer to home for me is think about the ERP space. What you'll start to see over the next 12 months is these agentic experiences in the ERP. So think of these as being someone submits an order, the order gets, as an email, let's say, gets understood by an AI, by a large language model, and essentially creates a pre-populated purchase order that may actually get sent back to the customer. The customer accepts it and the order gets created. So an end-to-end purchasing flow that is performed purely by an AI agent.
Well, tell me, Val, how is MYOB Acumatica and its 3 pillars, AI pillars, shaping its approach to AI in manufacturing?
We think MYOB Acumatica is going to change multiple parts of business, but there are 3 main experiences that we think about. One is around assist. So an AI assistant that will just make everyday tasks easier. The second is automate. AI automation that will automate the work and kind of unlock greater productivity, but also unlock better wisdom for decision making. And then the final aspect is advise. An AI advisor that provides you with practical insights such that you can help make the best decision with all of the information that you have. So think assist, automate, and advise.
And so what message would you give to manufacturing leaders who are still sort of on the fence about AI, waiting for the technology to mature, if you will? What would you say to them about why now is the right time to act?
Yeah, I'd go back to that autonomous business idea and this kind of leveling. There's no shortcuts, unfortunately. You can't jump from level 0 to level 5 by just waiting for the technology to mature, because every organization is a combination of people, process, and systems. And you can't just put in the systems at the end. So hence, my kind of big piece of guidance is to not wait. Now's the time to start preparing your business, be that through setting the foundations and making sure the data is there. Setting the cultural foundations around ensuring your organization is comfortable in experimenting with these technologies today, such that you can decide when they're sufficiently mature for them to come into your business, or equally so that you can plan an understanding of kind of what's coming so that you can schedule it into the kind of way that your business is operating. The other aspect which drives this urgency is, as much as AI is able to have practical impacts today with the technology that is available today. So as an example, actually in our most recent release, we've introduced anomaly detection that enables you to identify cost overruns. That's available in the product right now. The technology is moving incredibly fast. And the risk if you don't start now is that it becomes too fast to catch up and gets away from you. So when people, and you mentioned economists earlier, are stating that this could be the biggest shift since the Industrial Revolution, I see it and I'm like, it potentially could be. And you kind of don't want to miss that opportunity to be at the leading edge of the steam engine as opposed to on the tail of it.
That's probably a good place to wrap up, and that's handy, as that's all we have time for. Val, it's been very nice speaking to you. Thank you very much for joining us on AU Manufacturing Conversations.
It's been lovely to be here, and I hope this was helpful for everybody. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.